What's up guys, HellaBass here, and I'm going to talk to you about why baits like these and these work so good in the early spring for bass fishing. There's tons of good videos out there talking about why to throw red in the spring and how it's a good bait. But I'm going to give you the three main reasons why I think red is so important and why it's so dominant and why it really works. I'm also going to give you a couple exceptions at the end to consider, and then maybe a few baits to try out if you've never tried red before. So when is red good? It really seems like it's dominant in the early spring up to pre-spawn, but as soon as the fish start to get on the bed and spawn, it really kind of tapers off and kind of levels off and doesn't seem to be quite as popular or advantageous to throw red. Different variances of red can work all year long, and we'll talk about some of that as well. Red is pretty commonly accepted to be really strong in the spring, but I'm going to give you a little bit of the science and context on why I think it's so dominant. So I think it's important to understand visibility and how bass see red. Red and a few other colors are very, very bright and one of the easiest colors for bass to see from about 0 to 6 feet in the water column. Below 6 feet, red is actually one of the first colors to disappear. That is why you see a lot of square bills, you see a lot of bladed jigs, lipless crankbaits, and other baits like that be so dominant when red is introduced in the spring. You don't see a lot of deep diving red crankbaits, deep diving red jerkbaits, bottom hopping lures and things like that. It's those reaction baits in the 0 to 6 feet column of the water that really seem to excel early in the spring. I also think contrast is a big thing. It really seems like red is popular in grass lakes. I think that has to do with crayfish feeding on vegetation, getting their bright red color, but I also think a red bait stands out really good against hydrilla, milfoil, and other types of eelgrass and things like that. When this is coming through, ripping through, and you have all that green behind it, this bait contrasts, and it's really easy for the fish to identify, target, and connect. Now, I do think red is important all year long. I mean, we all know that red bug plays on ledge lakes. Red is really important for big worms, big baits down deep in ledge season and other times of the year. But I think that has more to do with red disappearing and the fish can't see it well. So they're picking up on the vibrations and the profile, not necessarily the red color. So early in the year, reaction baits, shallow baits, red. Later in the year, red, deep. So let's talk a little bit about the forage now. In the wintertime, crayfish hibernate in most of our lakes. Once the water gets below 50, they burrow in, they get under rocks, they dig into clay, things like that. So in lakes where the bottom content or the soil have that brown, red, natural color, when they come out, they're going to be red. They're going to be one of the brightest red colors of the year. They're going to have those natural red tones, those brown tones, and things like that. So picking a red bait is just going to accentuate that and key on that fish's propensity to want to feed on crayfish. They've been feeding on shad all winter long, other minnows and things like that. When the crayfish come out at 50, 52, 55 degrees, you know what? You've been eating chicken all winter long, and now you finally got a steak, something different. So I think that's part of it, is that they're looking for that forage change. They're looking for that new type of nutrients and source to get into their diet. So they're just looking for something new. They want something new. Lastly, let's talk about the biological need here. Fish in the pre-spawn, specifically females, need protein to develop their eggs. Crayfish offer a lot more protein than a shad or something like that, or a pelagic minnow. So crayfish, sunfish, perch, other things like that offer a lot more protein to a bass when they need it. So they have kind of a biological urge or a need to feed on a higher protein source meal. So whether it's a crayfish or a perch, things with a little more red, a little more orange, a little more color to them is important to a bass. And visually and instinctually, they're looking to feed on something besides a minnow or a shad. The other thing is, throughout the winter, bass tend to go deep, they tend to suspend, they tend to hang to the bottom, they're cold. Us as anglers don't target them nearly as much, so the fishing pressure goes way down. So in the springtime, they've gotten a little dumb. They haven't been fished for as much, at least in most of our lakes. They come up, they're starting to warm up, their metabolism's raising, they need to eat, they haven't felt pressure, they're a little more aggressive, they haven't been hooked 10 times. All of a sudden something bright shows up, flashes across their face. They can easily key on it, they're more aggressive this time of year, they need to eat because they're getting ready for the spawning cycle. So these are all things that will help a bass want to be more aggressive, and a bright color is going to allow them to lock onto that from a greater distance and then go get it. A fresh spring bass is a little bit like a mad bull. It gets up there, it's angry, You're the matador flashing this little red flag, it's bound to get pounced on. Let's talk about some of the exceptions to these rules. Now, not everywhere does the soil content and the type of geography in the lake and the crawfish forage produce bright red crayfish. But there still is an instinct for these fish to want to feed on a high protein source. So you may want to adjust your colors. Not every lake do you might want to go with the brightest red color. In certain parts of the country where maybe more bluegills, more perch, the crayfish are different color, maybe you want something a little more orange, or a little something more chartreuse with just hints of red. Or in clear water, you might want something that's a little more subtle. You do have those reds, you have those natural tones, you are keying on their instinct to feed on crayfish, but maybe not right in their face with a super bright red bait. You go something with toned down, more natural. Also consider watercolor. If you're in the deep south, things like that, just remember back when Jordan Lee crushed them on Eufaula with a bright red bladed jig like this and a bright red trailer. That might be a little much if you had, and that was in a flooded conditions where they had maybe like 6 inches of visibility. If you got 1, 2, 3, 5 feet of visibility, maybe use a red jig with a green pumpkin trailer or a watermelon red trailer. You kind of mixed up, give them some contrast, just give them hints of red. Or in a supernatural lake, you go something really subtle, light reds. Or give them a natural crayfish pattern with just little flashes of red on the belly. Really understand what your forage is, what your water clarity is, and things like that when making selections of these baits. If you've got a lot of grass, you got a lot of mud, a lot of cover, you might want to slam them with something like this Big O, bright red. One other thing to consider, fishing pressure. If you're on a big flat on Rayburn, or you're on Gunnersville, or any of these mega lakes, and everybody around you, like all 10 boats, are throwing bright red traps, that's when you might want to consider shaking it up. Now, there are going to be, even if that is the dominant pattern of the fish, even if most of those bass want to eat steak, there's always a few bass that prefer chicken or shrimp. So maybe then shake it up. Go with a shad colored pattern. Maybe you're not fishing for the majority of the fish, but if you're the only one throwing it, at least you're the only one fishing for those fish. Or go a little more natural. Mix it up. Go with some oranges. Mix in some chartreuse. So just be cognizant if everybody around you is throwing red, you might want to change it up a little bit. So we talked about baits early, some baits that are really cool to try out. There's a lot of bladed jigs out in the market. They're coming red colors. It's pretty easy to change your skirt, so you can buy just about any bladed jig, swap out the skirt. So that's a good option. Depending on your water quality, you might want to go with a full matching red trailer. You might want to go with something contrasting, black, green pumpkin, watermelon red, things like that. Just keep in mind, match it to your watercolor. Lipless crankbaits, anytime you got grass, super popular. You can pump this out of the grass, rip these out of the grass. These are great baits. Again, really focusing on that 0 to 6 feet of water. Flat-sided crankbaits, square bills, also really good options. When it's really cold, low 50s, the flat sides, as you get a little warmer, a little close to that spawn, try some square bills. Getting around rocks, deeper grass, things like that, let's never sleep on a DT6 like this. More natural lakes, go with this crawdad. If you got a little stain, more grass. The Demon, much like Randy Howell on Gunnersville, back when he won the Classic. Great baits. If you're looking for any of these baits, I'll have links down in the descriptions below. Also, spinnerbaits. You can go with full-on red-orange spinnerbaits, or sometimes just a little accent kicker blade like that will do really good in the spring. Really, any kind of reaction bait, 0 to 6 feet, will work for you in the spring. Hope that gives you a better understanding of why red is so dominant in the spring and why it is so productive. Now, hope you enjoyed the video. If you want to continue to catch more big bass and suck less, watch one of these videos right here next.